So let's say you found a skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dapper Dino channel. I am here today with Chris Shelton. Chris is a former Scientologist. He's a former Sea Org member. We'll probably get into exactly what that means a little bit. You were in Scientology for, I believe, 17 years. Is that right?
I was in Scientology for over 30 years in terms around it because I grew up in it.
Right.
But I worked for the Church of Scientology as an employee in one status or another for 25 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, there you go. He has a Master's of Science in, I believe it's the Psychology of Coercive Control.
Correct.
And also, you, in addition to your own podcast and your own YouTube channel, the YouTube channel is linked in the description, everybody. Go check that out. You also were on Leah Remini's Scientology in the Aftermath.
Yes, I was. I was the only one who got to be on the show twice. That's my big claim to fame.
Nice.
That one.
Which, by the way, guys, if you haven't seen that show, after this, go check that out because it's an excellent, just long-form expose on Scientology primarily, but then in the last season, they start to dig into a few other destructive cults. So it's an excellent show. It's Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, who's another former Sea Org member, and they interview all sorts of people. It's great. But we're not primarily here to talk about the coercive control aspects of Scientology because, well, I mean, that's what everyone talks about. So... To be fair,
I mean, it's I kind of, they talk about the salacious bits is what they tend to harp on,
right?
And the crazy belief system, right? And I only use air quotes because which religion doesn't have a crazy belief system? And they kind of harp on that, even though really the truth is only a minority of Scientologists are actually aware of Xenu and all that crap. So it's kind of fun to clear up the misconceptions, as you know. But there's a lot of aspects and angles to talk about Scientology from, and I'm happy to not talk about the coercive control elements.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to make you bigger than me, but then I couldn't figure out how to do that. So now I'm just going to do this. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm not an expert at StreamYard. So today what I really want to dig into is some of the beliefs that are not really super public facing, but that are in the writings of L. Ron Hubbard that are still part of church teachings, because while there's efforts to preserve everything that L. Ron Hubbard ever said or wrote, like his science fiction stories, like Battlefield Earth isn't a scripture of Scientology. Scientologists don't think that Battlefield Earth is literally a thing that is going to happen or has happened or something. They know it's a work of fiction. But
that's right.
But things like What to Audit or The History of Man, depending on what title we're going with, that is a part of what's basically the church's scripture. That's supposed to be something that Scientologists are supposed to believe and read, and so there's some interesting things in there. Now, so one of the first things I want to talk about is Hubbard's conception of the age of the universe, because as I think pretty much all of my audience knows, our best estimates right now are in the order of 13.5 billion years. And I'm not going to get into 4 or 5 decimal places. 13.5 is where we're going to round it today. But how old does Hubbard seem to think the universe is?
Okay, the oldest number that he gave, I think, I haven't sat and literally done the math on this,
right.
But the one that I go to straight off is 4 quadrillion years ago. Okay, is when he is what is a thing he calls Incident 1. It is part of the OT3 level confidential scriptures. In other words, the same place where people find out about Xenu, they also find out about this. And there's very, very little about Incident 1. It involves the entry of Theta, the spiritual quality or entity that is you and me in the Scientology dogma. That spiritual life form or life forms entered this physical universe made up of, Hubbard says, matter, energy, space, and time. 4 quadrillion years ago. And there were various events that occurred around that entry. But we've been getting in trouble ever since, according to him.
Okay. Now, I'm fairly confident that at some point someone said to Hubbard, but don't the scientists say that the universe is only, if you, like a dozen billion years or so old?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I don't know if you know, but on this channel, the thing I talk about the most often is Christian young earth creationism, which has a problem in the opposite direction, where they're like, oh no, the universe is like 6,000 years old. It's like, guys, you're off by a factor of like 750,000. You're just no. But this is a similar level of being wrong, but in the opposite direction. And so, obviously people say that young earth creation is like, come on, that's absurd. Someone must have said this to Hubbard. So did he have a response to, people pointing out that, hey, astronomers and cosmologists and things, no, we don't agree. That's way too long. And what was that response?
Yes, he did. In fact, I'm sure he had a number of responses. There's a lot. There's 5,000 lectures that L. Ron Hubbard gave that make up the body of Scientology's discovery path, right? So I have not, and I don't know anybody who has heard all of those lectures. A great chunk of them have still not been released to the public. So I can't say, with authority, I've heard everything Hubbard's had to say about this.
Right.
But one thing that pops to mind and has been there ever since I was in and left Scientology is a lecture he gave where he explained how you write off carbon dating and how you write off scientists who tell you, well, the universe is only X number of years old, or life has only been on this planet for X number of years because of carbon dating. And Hubbard's and I know you're going to laugh. Hubbard's simple Simon explanation of this to his audience was they don't know how much carbon is actually in the universe. And so therefore their estimates of how fast it's degraded and how long that takes based on carbon, 14, I think, dating process is totally off. They're totally wrong. They got it. They've grossly underestimated the age of the universe. That's what he said. He said that they've totally undershot it. Life is a lot older than science thinks, is kind of what his statement was. I'm paraphrasing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there's a lot of problems with that answer. I'm going to talk about a few of them. First, the age of the universe is absolutely not established by carbon dating. That's a big problem. It's actually not established by radiometric dating at all.
Right.
So it's, for those who might not be, super familiar, the way that the age of the age of the universe is measured and determined is using things like the Hubble equation, where you take into account things like the observable matter and energy in the universe, the current rate of spreading of radiation, and you take all of this into account, and then you say, okay, well, if this is how the process of the expansion of the universe is going down, when we start to rewind it, how long until everything is in one point? The whole universe is just one place. And the answer to that is about 13.5 billion years old. Carbon dating is used to date organic remains. So anything inorganic doesn't matter. It's actually not just organic. It has to actually be biogenic remains. So for instance, if you found some naturally occurring methane somewhere, you can't carbon date that. It actually has to have been part of an organism.
Right.
And it can only go back about 50,000 years. So you can date like timber or some bones from 50,000 years ago with carbon dating, but you can't do anything back a billion years even, never mind a quadrillion years. And it doesn't...
Well, exactly. Now let me just throw this out as the tiniest of mitigating circumstances here. Hubbard was referring in that lecture to carbon dating of fossils and bones. Okay. But what he would do, and this is not common this is not unique to Hubbard. Lots of pseudoscientists do this. Is you take one aspect of science, carbon dating, and you invalidate it to then make the larger point. So therefore, they don't know what they're doing.
Yes.
period. So he didn't have to go and touch any of Hubble. I don't even know if he knew who Hubble was, but he knew and had heard of carbon dating and went, oh, well, here's a way I can throw a zinger in that.
Right.
And let's also remember the context of the time period. This is in the 1950s. He's giving these lectures, not because I'm apologizing for it, but just to contextualize.
Yeah, no, I want to be fair, right?
You know, for the first time and not challenging it,
yeah.
right?
And look, I do like to be fair and keep in mind when something is said. I can't hold someone not knowing about a new discovery against them if the thing I'm talking about happened before the discovery, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, like if Hubbard wants to talk about how, you know, dinosaurs were cold-blooded, even though now we know many of them were not, like, whatever, I'm not going to complain about it, because in 1952 everyone thought they all were, so it's fine.
Exactly. But clearly they did know about carbon dating in the 1950s, had it down, and Hubbard just didn't care. It just didn't fit with his narrative, and so he could dismiss it out of hand. And he did that all.
Okay. So that's that great age of the Earth, or not the Earth, sorry, but I guess also probably the Earth. Does he also think that the Earth is about this old? Does he have ideas when the Earth comes about?
No, I don't remember him giving a date to that, but he referred to, but he was consistent in saying that this is older, much, much, much older. Like the Xenu story, that's 76 million years ago.
Yeah.
That all goes down. Which,
for those of you at home, that in real life, that's the middle of the Campanian stage of the Cretaceous, when Styracosaurus and Gorgosaurus are...
Exactly, and he's claiming that at that time, there was a semi-human, there was a humanoid civilization thriving that was on this planet, ruled the world, looked in awe. He describes it as the Marcabian Confederacy in his literature, and it's a confederacy of 13 planets, of which this one is part of. Excuse me, and there were people and there were cars, and he describes it specifically as looking an awful lot like modern civilization of the 1950s with fire trucks and policemen and all this stuff. That's how he describes life on Earth, which he refers to as Tegeac, because that was the name of the planet back then.
Sure, why not?
During this Marcabian time period, and they had atomic weapons, they had spacefaring technology. Hubbard made claims often that the speed of light is complete bullshit as a speed limit in Earth. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to curse or not.
I try to keep these somewhere around PG-13, but like whatever.
Fair enough. BS. Yeah. So Hubbard would throw that out all the time. He called Einstein an inveterate liar. He's just lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Because he said, I have my own personal memories, Hubbard said, of traveling around the universe faster than the speed of light. That's how people get around. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. His narratives wouldn't work if it took millions of years to go from one place to the next in the galaxy. So it had to be true, right? That we have faster than light travel.
So his literal response to the fact that his ideas are scientifically impossible is just, well, I made it up one day, so you should believe it.
Yeah, it's that science. I mean, he doesn't say that, of course.
Right,
though.
But that's the implication, it seems, that ultimately he made it up one day, so why don't you believe him? He's L. Ron Hubbard.
Well, there's a difference between I made it up and I remembered it.
True, but I don't think he ever had those memories. I think he made those memories up, though.
Well, of course he didn't. Of course he didn't. But as a Scientologist, we believed he did.
Yeah.
You know?
That's certainly a take. By the way, guys, if you want to check on the speed of light, basically all you need is some graph paper, some marshmallows, and a microwave oven. Because you can actually do things with like the wavelength of the microwave oven and check to see where the hotspots are, and that wavelength will correlate back to the speed of light. Now, to be fair, because the meter has recently been redefined in terms of the speed of light, what you're actually doing is measuring the length of the meter, because the speed of light can't be measured anymore. But still, it's the same experiment that you could have done to measure the speed of light until that redefinition. Because yeah, technically now you can't measure the speed of light. You can only measure the length of the meter.
See, Hubbard would have a field day with what you just said. He would rip up one side and down the other about how ridiculous that is because of how complicated of an answer it is. And there's one of the pseudoscientific con points, the fundamentals of pseudoscience, if you will, as far as my take on it goes, is the assumption, the completely unwarranted and BS assumption, and yet every one of these guys makes it, that the truth is simple and easy to understand. And if you can't explain the truth to a child in a way that they'll get it, you don't have a handle on the truth. You're lying, or you're involved in something overly complex and nonsensical. So that's why they can just dismiss that out of hand, because with what you were just talking about there with, we don't even know the redefinition of the meter and the speed of light, and we can't measure it. People's eyes glaze over when you say stuff like that. They can't follow it, and they want a simple answer. And that's why Hubbard's answers appeal to people, even as ridiculous as they are. And I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. That is a thing. I mean, you see that all over pseudoscience. Things like, oh, hey, these climatology models are complicated, so I'm just going to pretend that climate change doesn't exist. It's like, well,
exactly.
One, yes, they are complicated, but two, sometimes reality is just complicated. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry, I guess.
That's right.
And yeah, that does happen a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so
it was. I mean, I only make this point actually because it was an important part of my own recovery out of Scientology. To realize that I craved simple solutions, and that I had been indoctrinated to believe that simple solutions are the only real solutions, and real answers are always easy. And that is just a thought-stopping cliche. It is nonsensical. I mean, some of the answers we have to very important questions are incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
Well above my pay grade.
Oh, mine too.
Right? But you don't get to the common folk with answers like that. And that's where Hubbard, pseudoscientists thrive.
Okay. Well, so another thing that I want to talk about is, in addition to having somewhat eccentric views about the age of the universe.
Yes. I'm going to use that. I'm totally using it. He had some eccentric ideas.
I've been told that I'm very good at being politely understated.
Yes, it was very good.
So, in a book that we had talked a little bit about before we actually went on air, it's usually called the History of Man, although I believe it was originally published as What to Audit.
Correct.
And that was 1952?
Yep.
Okay. I did do a little bit of background research on this.
Yeah, good. There's a whole Wikipedia page on this book, and it really does break down quite well.
It's crazy. So my understanding of this is that most of this is the drug-fueled rambling of Ron Hubbard Jr. that was written down by the senior.
That's right.
And so from that, we get such interesting ideas as humans are descended from jellyfish who turned into clams.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I would talk about some of these ideas. So first of all, in real science that has things like, actual taxonomy and phylogenetic trees, and does things like check on whether or not this makes sense, that kind of thing. Humans are absolutely not descended from clams or from jellyfish. That is not how that works. Not even a little bit.
No, they're not. Nope.
The common ancestor of the clam and jellyfish was basically a tiny worm with a gut that probably went both ways, and it probably didn't have eyes or limbs. It was basically just a tube of muscle surrounding a tube of gut, and that's about it. And it probably burrowed through the mud of, the cryogenian ocean.
Mm-hmm.
About a billion-ish years ago. Well, yeah, about a billion-ish years ago. It's probably, well, no, that's maybe about 600 million years ago, since sponges really only go back to about 800 years ago. Or 800 million, sorry. Anyway, yeah, and the common ancestor between jellyfish and clams and humans would have been much more like, 750 million years ago, and it probably was basically just a bunch of muscle cells with some skin. Probably didn't even have a gut. Yeah, and it was probably just absorbing nutrients from like bacterial mats in the substrate. Yeah, and so by the time you get to the common ancestor between clams and humans, yeah, those two lines diverge, and there's no clams in human ancestry. But one of the things I find interesting is his idea. So I'm going to call these, Ron Hubbard Sr.'s ideas because he took them on board and, published them. Even though he's basically just writing down his son's drug-fueled ramblings. And by drug-fueled, I mean literally, this is not something that's disputed. He was given speed by his father, and basically, I think these were supposed to be auditing sessions that he's going through this in, right?
Correct.
Okay. For those who might not be familiar, auditing is a Scientology kind of counseling with an electronic device that basically measures your skin resistance. And there's an idea that the motion of the indicator on this device can tell you what kind of charge the ideas you're thinking about have. There's a kind of kernel of truth in that your skin resistivity to electricity can change based on your mental state, because it does affect things like how much you're sweating and things like that. So there's a kind of a thing there, but it's not what Scientology is telling you it is. You're not measuring the charge of your brain state or something.
No, you're not. Nor are you measuring sheets of energy that impose themselves upon your body, which you refer to as mental image pictures, but they're actually sheets of energy, see, and they impose themselves on the body, and that's where the resistance to the electrical current comes from, is from these undetectable levels of energy, because we don't have the devices yet invented here on Earth. This is all Hubbard. To measure these forms, these higher wave forms of energy.
By the way, guys, resistivity is a real word in like electrical theory. It's a thing. Sorry, one of my audience is like, "Come on, that's not that is absolutely a word."
It's a thing, yeah. So, and also let's go ahead and clarify for the audience here, because this is convoluted and weird. What Hubbard was trying to do in 1952 was join. He had not yet actually come up with the term, or he had come up with the term, but he hadn't yet come up really with the subject Scientology. This was very, very, very brand spanking new in 1952.
This is post-Dianetics, but pre-Scientology.
Yeah, he's still writing on Dianetics, and the groups and the ideas of the groups were common to Dianetics, and Dianetics had positioned itself as the modern science of mental health. And so Hubbard's model of the mind included this reactive mind, where all of your trauma and unconscious states and pain, all those memories are stored there. And by addressing those incidents of pain and trauma, you could relive and thereby decharge them, destimulate them, make them ineffective against you anymore on a subconscious level. And that was the appeal of Dianetics. People were like, wow, really? That's how the mind works? Absolutely, I'm on board. And it was popular for a short while until it didn't meet any of its promises.
Right.
And it tanked twice. So Hubbard was kind of casting about for, okay, where am I going to take this? And he had been working on structural problems. Well, where are these engrams? Where is this stuff stored? How does this actually work? Where is this reactive mind in our brains? And he was like, well, I don't really know. I don't know. I'm not sure. And then he started coming out with this theta stuff, that we are not matter, energy, space, and time. We are an entity or life force that animates matter, energy, space, and time. We are separate from that. This is important to understand to this whole genetic line thing, because what Hubbard was describing there is life force. And he was saying that, there's this thing that exists completely separate, and you have a mind, you own a body, and you run it for as long as the body is good, and then the body dies, and you go and take over another body, a baby, and it grows, and you are born, and then you have that life. You experience life through vicariously, you could say, through the body, and the body provides sensation, and it's very interesting, and you get to have sex and stuff like that, you know, and isn't this fun? And that's what having a body is all about, is experiencing the sensation of the physical universe. So this is, Hubbard said, this has been going on without end for quadrillions of years. And because this has been going on, Thetans, the spiritual entities, he doesn't call them ghosts or souls, he calls them Thetans, have been spiraling down in ability and awareness and perception because they get socked into this trap of the physical universe and they can't get out. And then they start believing that they actually are their bodies. They're no longer aware of their spiritual self. So the whole body thing is this big trap we're all stuck in, and Scientology is the answer, right? It's the thing that's going to let you out. Okay. So that's the kind of bottom line appeal of Scientology to most Scientologists once they kind of get past the inner, you know, into the inner sanctum of it and start like figuring out what it's all about. This is what it's all about. So Hubbard in 52 was trying to formulate, well, how do I explain this with evolutionary theory and bodies, and why are we melded to them, and how does this all work, and where have we been in the past? And he came up with this concept of another kind of life entity called a genetic entity. And this is, it's a very, even in Scientology, we used to do our nut trying to figure out what the hell this thing is that he's talking about. This alternate theory, and I'm going to look at the Wikipedia page here where it talks about this genetic entity. The idea is that it's kind of a faux life form, not really a full Thetan, but some other version of that. And the genetic entity sort of oversees, intends, if you will, the evolutionary process. And so, you know, why does evolution happen? Well, because this genetic entity is kind of there pushing it along and making it happen. That's about as much explanation as you get of it, okay? Right. It's not, this, Hubbard's not giving details about all this, which is why it's so confusing even for Scientologists. But this is kind of the takeaway from it. And the genetic entity is, or this, you know, these billions of genetic entities, there's not just one of them, but the one that is attached to your body right now has its own memories.
Right, from all the previous life forms it was.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the idea here is not that man is a direct descendant of a clam.
Okay.
It's that man is an amalgamation of a body, a Thetan, a mind with all the pictures and everything, kind of like a toolbox that you carry around with you,
okay,
and a genetic entity that's attached to the body. And the genetic entity is the thing that has the memories of the clam. But you can't, as a spirit, you're in such a degraded state, you're not differentiating any of these things. You think you're a body, and the genetic entity's memories are right there, accessible if you look for them. And so you could confuse yourself in this whole clam thing and these other boohoos and cosmic implants and photon converters and all this other nonsense Hubbard wrote down. These are supposed to be genetic memories, okay, that matter to you now because they can cause you to have pains and aches and chronic conditions because you're confusing those old memories with your current life situation.
Okay, well, I have that there might not be an answer to this question I'm about to ask because, as you said, we're getting into a concept in Scientology that even Scientologists have a tendency to kind of ignore because it's hard to figure out how any of this is supposed to work in with the rest of Scientology.
Right.
It's sort of like Hubbard didn't make the rest of Scientology backwards compatible with what to audit for some reason.
No, he advanced the line and he kind of dumped a bunch of this stuff. Yeah. It's there, it exists. And a lot of Scientologists, to their credit, you know, will look at this and go, well, this is ridiculous. And they know science, or they've been educated since then. I mean, this is 50, 70 years ago, right? So they look at that and they go, okay, well, Hubbard's wrote that then, but we have since learned more things. And they just dismiss it and move on. Okay. It's not like, they believe every single word of this is absolutely sacred. Some do. I struggled for years trying to make all of this stuff make sense.
Okay.
Some don't. Some just blow it off. You know what I mean? Just to say that.
Okay. Well, that is an important distinction. It's actually one of the kind of thing that I talk about when, the vast majority of Christians are not young Earth creationists. It's actually like a weird group of a particular brand of Protestantism that's really only common in the Anglosphere. Like, you go outside of, like, English-speaking countries, especially the U.S., the Christians there don't even know that that's a thing that people are talking about.
Right.
So I do want to, it is very important to point out that all religions, even the destructive cults, are internally diverse, and not everyone in them has the same belief system or the same level of devotion or the same level of piety, all that stuff. But I am a little bit confused, though, because the book also, if I'm remembering correctly, and I have not sat down and read this whole thing, right? I'm looking at, like, excerpts and stuff because, well, one, I'm not going to spend money on it, and two, I don't really want to spend my time on it.
Of course, not a problem.
So
that's why I'm here.
Right, exactly. But it says things like the clam shell was developed as a result of a jellyfish bumping into a cave wall. And so, to me, that says that the idea is supposed to be that physically, jellyfish were having this problem with cave walls, which is weird because jellyfish aren't big cave animals, but whatever, we'll set that aside. I'm sure they encounter caves here and there. Mm-hmm. And, like, they're apparently getting, like, physically injured. So there's some kind of evolutionary pressure to develop protection, and that's how they turn into clams. And then elsewhere it says things like, the hinge on the clam is what turns into the jaw, which also implies some kind of actual ancestor-descendant relationship where fundamentally you're physically a clam and the clamshell is just embedded in your jaw, and I guess the rest of you just grew around the clam somehow.
Well, that's one way of explaining it. Another way, and I'm not saying that your version is not bizarre and right. I'm saying another way of thinking about the same data is that the genetic entity, which exists right now in present time in your body doing its thing, has these memories. And this memory of this clam back in the day having a sore jaw and having a piece of sand stuck in it or whatever, when you, as a spiritual entity in the here and now, connect with that memory from the genetic entity somehow, there has to be a translation process because you're not a clam.
Right.
So what does that pain and sensation connect to?
Okay.
A jaw.
Okay.
So it connects to your jaw. Therefore, the pain from that incident translates in present time to a pain in your jaw, and you develop bad teeth, or some problem or whatever, and you end up at the dentist because of this problem. And nobody can figure out really where it came from. It just seemed to appear out of nowhere. Well, it came from this clam memory imposing itself on you now. And Hubbard, and it's obviously this is, kind of magical thinking, but that's what Scientology is all about, is magical thinking.
Okay.
So,
yeah,
because the principle we haven't said out loud, so let me say it, is the spirit, the Thetan, is 1000% in charge of the condition of the body. And the state of the body reflects the state of the Thetan. So the Thetan can manifest its issues or problems by affecting the health or condition of the body. And it can create problems in the body like cancer, leukemia, bad eyesight, etc., because of the Thetan's stress and trauma imposing itself on the body. So that's, we like I said, we didn't say that out loud. So that's the kind of power, we're talking about there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing because you're right, we didn't say that. And I kind of had that as like my background information I was starting with, but that's really not fair to everyone because compared to most non-Scientologists, I think I've done a little bit more research into what Scientology is about. Mostly because I actually knew someone who was interested in becoming like a Squirrel Zone Scientologist. He was interested in Hubbard's writings, but he wasn't very interested in the Church of Scientology proper, which, I mean, first, I think it's a little weird to be that interested in those writings because they're rather silly. But also, you know what? Hey, good on you for being like, yeah, okay, but this organization is something I should stay away from, even if I do like these writings.
Correct.
So, you know, because I had a friend who was in that position, I was like, well, maybe I should look at what is this idea? What are these things he keeps talking about? You know, because he's telling me about like the arc triangle, and I'm like, what the heck is an arc triangle? What is that?
You now know that it's called the ARC triangle,
Yes.
right?
Well, he didn't though, because he wasn't talking to other Scientologists. He was just reading things.
Right.
And so
right.
so like it was a weird sort of thing. And like I don't think I've mentioned this guy on my channel before because like it never comes up. But yeah, it was this whole weird thing. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good on you, by the way, for going and looking into it a little bit first before you just told him what a schmuck he was.
I never told him he was a schmuck because you know what?
Good.
He was a good guy.
Good.
And you know what? I don't have to agree with people on everything.
Fair enough.
You know?
We're not going to anyway.
Yeah.
So
if you think that you're an immortal spiritual being, okay. Just, you know, treat other people well and, you know, don't be a jerk. And you can do as much auditing with electrode cans as you want. That's fine. My problem with Scientology really comes in terms of like sociological and interpersonal with the bad behavior. And I also do like to talk about the pseudoscience stuff, which, to be fair, he also wasn't a big fan of a lot of the pseudoscience-y kind of trillions of years old universe. And I was like, I don't know about that. That doesn't seem like it jives right with me. But again, he wasn't being influenced by, you know, like the official Church of Scientology. No one was going to cut off all contact with him if he questioned the great Ron Hubbard. That wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And of course, there's a whole other pseudoscientific layer with their therapy process, the auditing procedure. Right. That was the subject of my research, my work when I was doing my master's program, was breaking that down.
So auditing is something that comes out of Dianetics, right? That's
yep.
It starts there, and in the Dianetics era, this was supposed to be sort of like a team exercise, right? Like you and the other person audit each other through these memories, and then you try to get rid of the negative associations that you have with these memories, and in some cases you're recovering memories before that may have even been from previous lifetimes, which actually means that, you know, you're imagining things.
Well, yeah, you're nailing it. That's everything you just said is exactly true. I really appreciate the work you've done to find out more about this, because most interviewers do not.
Well,
so you're here.
I try not to come in and be an idiot.
No, it's great. It's really good. You're getting it. And of course, they don't call it false memories, right? At the time, 1950 is when this book was released, and at that time, the concept of prenatal memories was a thing. This was a thing that was talked about in psychology circles. It was a subject of real research, and it should have been. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. It didn't pan out, but it just so happens that it was a thing on the public's mind, or at least in certain scientific circles. And Hubbard jumped onto that with Dianetics and got into how you could recall your birth,
right?
And how birth was a traumatizing episode for every single person who experienced it. There's pain, there's unconsciousness, there's all kinds of nonsense with it. Of course, you're entering into this life, I mean, you know, through trauma.
I would rather not consciously remember my own birth. It doesn't sound like a fun time. So, you know,
I would not want that at all.
Yeah.
But sure enough, you suggest that to people, and a certain percentage of them will serve you up their memories.
Right.
That's how it works.
Okay. And when we're moving from Dianetics into Scientology, as you know, Hubbard has lost the copyright to Dianetics through the bankruptcy and all that. Auditing seems to go into more of a one-sided affair, where you have an auditor and you have someone who is being audited, and there's not like so much of a back and forth. There's a trained auditor who is on one side of the desk, you're on the other, and that person, say he or she, going to audit you, and you're not auditing them back in this circumstance. And then there's lots of note-taking about this. So what is it that precipitates this change from sort of the tandem team auditing that, if I remember correctly, in Dianetics was even encouraged to you can just go off and do some auditing at home or something with, you know, your spouse or your friend or something.
Absolutely. And that was how it was presented. And Hubbard had no idea what he had on his hands when he published the book. He didn't know whether it was going to take off or not. It did. It became a legit bestseller. So suddenly all these people are teaming up all over the country and doing this Dianetics auditing on each other in their living rooms and stuff, just like the book says to do. And Hubbard realized in the avalanche of letters and questions he was getting in response to this, that there was a ton of opportunity and potential in answering these questions and being paid money to do so. And he started doing a series of public lectures right out of his house, I think, initially. And then they rented a space because people were showing up physically at his place going, hey, I got questions. I tried to do this, this, and this. This didn't work.
Knock on the door. Excuse me, Mr. Hubbard, could you?
Yeah, literally. Because this is a book that is promising people that cancer can be cured by doing this process. He was making bold claims. And people wanted to believe it, and they wanted to give it a fair shot. And so when they ran into issues, if they knew where he was or they could track him down, and again, this is no internet, they had to literally go find him. But people were that interested in this and curious about it. And I'm not talking about, thousands of people. I'm talking about a few hundred, but that's when it's just you and all these people, that's a thing. And Hubbard was quick to realize there's money in them thar hills, right? He started giving lectures and set up what were called Dianetics foundations. And he got volunteers, he got help, he had people going, I'll work for you, I'll do this, I'll set this up. And they set it up in Los Angeles, they set it up in New Jersey, various other places. And they started becoming big, organizations that were recording L. Ron Hubbard's lectures now. He's doing auditing demonstrations and he's doing lectures. And it was about a year into this that through the foundation that Hubbard started really establishing classwork and formal certification and training in being a professional Dianeticist. That started. And then he continued that with the churches of Scientology. He set up what he called Hubbard Guidance Centers, or HGCs, as a unit inside the organization that delivers professional auditing. And these are people who are certified by the organization as legit standard Scientology auditors. You could count on the fact that they were trained, they knew what they were doing, they'd seen everything you could see, and they could deal with you because of that. Right. Whereas your friend Joe,
what does Joe know? Who knows?
What does Joe know, right?
Right.
And if you don't want to audit Joe, you just want to be audited, and a lot of people are like that.
Okay.
Believe me, I know, right? Because I ran this stuff for years. This was had a lot of appeal, and people would pay big money for this. At the time, hundreds of dollars. Now it's thousands.
I mean, if you accept the basic premise that auditing is doing anything effective, that all does actually kind of make sense to me, right? Like, I would want there to be someone with known training standards who is going to go through this with me. Because, I mean, yeah, that does sound like it would probably be better than just grabbing Joe off the street and like, hey, man, let's why don't you hold these cans, and I'm going to ask you questions, and we're going to see what happens.
That's right. That's right. And that was kind of more the spirit of the thing back in the 50s. People were roll your own auditing. They were coming up with their own stuff. It was a wild time in this group of people to be around. And Hubbard was cribbing ideas from try this? What about this? What about that? And he'd adopt certain principles of it. And the next day or the next month, there'd be new issues or new lectures talking about these new procedures that he had discovered. Right. Of
course.
And who was going to contradict him, So it was a wild time back then with all of this until it really sort of formalized into what it is now, which took, about 12 years.
Okay. Now I have a related question, or I guess it's not super related. I still find it an interesting question. Now you were working for the church for, you said, somewhere around like 2.5 decades?
Yep.
Okay. Now, I know that when someone is in the Sea Org dies, they are officially granted a leave of absence.
Yes, they are. 21 years.
Right, because your contract is for 1 billion years, and chances are you didn't live that long.
Chances are. Yeah.
Has anyone ever said that they've coming back from their leave of absence to restart or to come back and keep working on their 1 billion years after having died? Because I feel like the Sea Org has now been long enough that some of the first people who died in it could now have, by Scientology standard, received new bodies and be old enough to come work for the Sea Org.
Yep.
To your knowledge, has anyone ever been like, hey, I already did, my first 40 years of Sea Org. Now after my 21 years, that math probably doesn't work, but anyway, I did my first 20 years of Sea Org time. 21 years later, I'm back. I want to start, working on that 1 billion years again. Has anyone ever claimed to be doing that?
Yes.
Really?
You're talking to one.
Oh, so you thought that you had already signed the 1 billion year contract? Did they make you sign
I thought I was a Sea Org member in a past life.
Okay, that is fascinating. So, did they make you sign a new contract, or did they allow you to sign like a 1 billion years minus?
I was already in the Sea Org when those memories.
Okay, right.
So I'd already come back.
Okay. Well, obviously, no one is going to have.
The motto of the Sea Org is "We come back."
All right. All right. Now, see, I'd never actually heard of anyone saying that they were a former Sea Org member and now they're back to continue on. Yeah. So, because I always wondered, like, you must be expecting this. You must be expecting people to be like, hey, I'm back for more Sea Org because I was already in and I want to finish out more of my time or whatever. And I guess at no point is anyone going to be like, oh, well, I already served my 1 billion years because, obviously the Sea Org started in like, what, the 70s or something?
Yeah, 1967.
Okay, 67.
Started.
All right.
And both, right? You got all kinds there. It's a large enough group that you're going to have a wide variety of experiences there. Nobody's holding your feet to the fire on that sort of thing unless they're trying to recruit you into the Sea Org right here and now, right? And if it comes up, fine. But it's something that would come up in your auditing. Maybe you share it with other people. Maybe you don't. It wasn't something I walked around bragging about. It was something that I recalled in a session, and I thought it was real. False memory implantation is a thing in Scientology.
Oh, yeah.
And I was all in on that. I was raised with it. So, to me, that was the truth.
Okay.
And it took more than a little bit of time to figure out and reorient myself on all of that. But yeah, I definitely met past life Sea Org members in the Sea Org and in Scientology, people who claim that. Parents of Scientology kids are sometimes, some of them are quite desperate for their child to have such memories. It's a big, for them, it's a status thing for some reason.
I guess I could kind of see that, but also, if I think too much about it, I'm like, yeah, but why would that be a status thing? You didn't do anything to have the kid who happened to be a Sea Org member. That's just the Thetan that happened to it happen.
No. You provided a Scientology household for that Thetan to come to.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. If this is a former Sea Org member, if this is a person who's coming out of the Sea Org, they know things.
Right.
They're aware of things. They're not anybody in your audience who's just a bunch of, dunderheads. This is somebody who's had a peek behind the curtain, who's understood that there's more to all of this. And they need Scientology households and parents to come back to. They don't want to have to go redo all this and end up in, some, with some Okie from Skokie who doesn't know anything. Is going to raise them as a Christian. That's the last thing they want, right? So they pride themselves on the fact that they are raising a little second generation Sea Org member here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, when you put it that way, because look, I don't have any cultural experience with Scientology, right?
Oh, no, of course.
All of my Scientology stuff is things I've read or seen or, things like that. And ultimately, I think this is my second ever actual conversation with someone who was in the actual Church of Scientology. Like I said, I had, conversations with my friend who was sort of loosely in the squirrel zone, which we should probably define that because that's not a normal thing that people hear. The squirrel zone is the Church of Scientology's term for basically freelance Scientologists who they like the stuff that Hubbard was saying about auditing and reincarnation type things, and engrams, which are these memories that your subconscious mind is causing you to have pain or illness because of. They like all that, but they are not interested in the organization run by David Miscavige, which, to be fair, you shouldn't be.
Correct. And the way that Scientology gets away with saying that these quote unquote squirrels, shouldn't exist is, imagine if you trademarked or copyrighted the Bible as a Christian, as a mainline Christian group. Let's say some mainline Christian group decided, I'm going to copyright the Bible, and our interpretation of the Bible is the only one that's going to matter and count. And anybody else who tries to offer some other interpretation or idea or practice of this, we're going to sue them out of existence for copyright violation.
Yeah.
That's what the Church of Scientology actually believes they have the power to do with those ideas.
Which, if I remember correctly, ended up with a bit of a catch-22, because when the OT3 documents leaked, they tried to sue to recover them on the basis of copyright, but that meant that they had to admit that they were authentic. Because if they're inauthentic, then you don't have the copyright.
Correct. And that's how we know that they're valid.
There you go. So for those of you guys who might be just recently joining us, the OT3 stuff is the Xenu story and a lot of the space opera stuff. And so by virtue of filing that lawsuit, it is a tacit admission that this is in fact the real OT3 documents. So, sorry, guys. Curiously, there has not been an epidemic of death by pneumonia, which is supposed to be what happens if people who aren't prepared for OT3 read it. Now, I've read it, and now, to be fair, I have almost died of pneumonia, but it was not after reading these. It was before reading these. So unless, I'm psychic and learned about them subconsciously from my future or something, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that my pneumonia was not related to the later reading of the OT3 documents. So is there ever any discussion about the fact that, despite the fact that those documents are public now, that people don't seem to be dying of pneumonia?
This is one of those minutia points that you kind of have to drill into the details to make it make sense. So let's go ahead and do that real fast, but it's not going to really be a big thing for most people.
Okay.
Hubbard the exact claim, if you really dig into the materials of Scientology, is that if you try to run the 3 incidents, if you get caught up in the pictures and you're trying to actually go through it, relive it, experience it, do the things you're supposed to do to process that incident in Scientology, if you try to make somebody who's not yet there, not ready for it, and you do that to them, you will kill them. Mere exposure to the knowledge itself is not what Hubbard said will kill you. It's trying to run it. But it's a fine point of distinction.
But still, it is a distinction that does make a difference in what you would predict would happen if these became public. Because
that's right.
Most people who aren't in Scientology are going to see this, and they're not going to think, oh, well, this is a real thing, I should try to remember it. Because why would you? That would be silly. Because one of the things about it is actually speaking about going back to like the length of the time the universe has been around here, and the fact that this stuff is supposed to be taking place in what conventionally would be considered like the Campanian stage of the Cretaceous, and not like a time when there's just a bunch of people with like motor cars and DC-8s. Various volcanoes that are mentioned didn't exist 75 million years ago.
You don't say.
So
no. Right, and even worse, the North Star was not Polaris.
Actually, in 75 million years ago, I don't even know if we could say for certain that there was a particular star that was roughly where the North Star would be.
Exactly, the North Star was different, and the sky was different, and this is, I did enough research on this to establish that much, because Hubbard specifically refers to Polaris as a North Star during that incident and time period, and a physical impossibility. So even if you allow for all of our geology is totally wrong and we totally don't get it, and the volcanoes are much older, even if you allow for that, the stuff he says extra planet wide, right? The North Star and stuff like that, even that's wrong. So
it's just fractally wrong all the way down.
Every fact connected with the OT3 stuff is total nonsense.
Okay. Now, I have heard in like various interviews and things, some people who said that when they got this, they're like, no, this can't be it. This can't be real. Is this like a test to see if I actually believe it? And then if I do, maybe I'm crazy. Like, what's actually? So it seems like, what is keeping people in that situation in? Because the people who I've heard say things like that doesn't seem to have usually been the thing that precipitated directly them leaving Scientology. Is it just a sunk cost fallacy? Like, I'm already like, hundreds of thousands of dollars into this. I can't just quit now.
Let me ask you this, right? If you went to four-year university and you pay all the money, you jump through all the hoops, you take all the tests, you go through all the rigor and nonsense and stress of getting a degree, and it's you're coming into the second half of the last year of your education, and they start laying stuff like this on you. Right? Or unbelievable stuff you just go, wait a minute, what? And they go, look, in order to graduate, you're going to have to regurgitate this. You're going to have to know this. You're going to have to think with this. We don't really care whether you believe it or not, but you're going to have to go along with this.
Okay.
What would you do?
I mean, yeah, that's fair. I would probably just say, all right, I'll just shut up for the next few months and just say, yeah, sure, whatever, this is fine.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Especially if this is not an antagonistic organization for you. These are your friends.
Right.
These are people you socialize with. These are people you trust. And they say to you, look, I know it sounds a little whack. Just give it some faith here. Just give it some time. Go test it in an auditing room on the e-meter. Let the e-meter tell you the truth of this. And you're already hundreds, if not thousands of hours invested in using an e-meter.
Okay.
And you've already learned how to use it on yourself now. You do what's called solo auditing, where you take yourself into a room and do the process. It's not somebody else doing it to you. So the e-meter is the thing that actually ends up selling this. And I've had Scientologists tell that to me to my face when I was in. Is I had people even describe to me, they never breathed a word of what the story was, but they said they found it hard to believe, but the e-meter verified it.
Okay. So, that actually reminds me of a different group. So, a lot of times when you get Mormon missionaries at the door, one of the tactics that they'll have, usually if you've expressed some kind of interest, right? This is usually not their first thing that they go with, is they'll say something like, pray sincerely about whether or not the Book of Mormon is true. And if you get a feeling of affirmation or something, then that's God telling you that it's true. Of course, what's actually happening is that if you sincerely want something to be true, and then you ask whatever you think is the thing that's going to give you the truth, you're just going to find that what you wanted to be true has been confirmed anyway, which, shock.
That's right.
So...
I mean, it really does come down to one of my favorite sayings that I've sort of, developed over all this, is that, people are capable of believing anything.
Yeah.
If you give them a good enough reason to believe it.
And hey, you know what? Superpowers and immortality do sound like a pretty good reason. And that is what Scientology promises you.
That's right. That's right. And confirmation bias and motivated reasoning allow a person to believe that they are accomplishing that. Coincidences, made out to be things they did. Oh, I lost my keys. There they are. I found them because I'm so OT, right? Because I'm so super powered, things like that. I got that job. She likes me. Any number of things that happen to you that are good, you immediately, as a Scientologist, attribute it to the fact that you're a Scientologist, that this is happening to you.
Little known fact, non-Scientologists, incapable of finding car keys.
Yeah, totally.
Just can't do it.
They're gone.
You have to at least get to clear to have even a chance.
That's right. I mean, the Tom Cruise video really sort of embodies this, and Tom Cruise, of all people, is ranting in that turtleneck video that he made years ago, right? Where he says, we're the authorities on the mind. We're the authorities on mental health. When, at an accident scene, we're the only ones who can truly be effective. I mean, you understand when you watch that, the heady space that they're putting themselves in.
Well, and I mean, look, it's an attractive proposition because I think everyone feels like there are things in their life that they're really not in control of, that they wish they were. And the idea that, and this is sort of like the basic pitch, right? This is like what you're getting at the lowest levels of entry into Scientology. We're not even talking about like space operas and clams or anything. This is just like, you walk into an org and this is what the pitch is. It's like, hey, look, we can teach you how to truly be aware of yourself and the world and how to effectively act in it to accomplish your goals. And we do it by these courses and these auditing sessions. And the thing is, that's an attractive pitch, and it also doesn't sound crazy. So the thing is, you can imagine, yes, if I had a perfect ability to know myself and the world around me, of course I would be able to be effective in my actions, because I would have all the relevant information, and I would have this perfectly rational mind. And so yeah, of course that would check out. Of course, the actual techniques don't give you those things, but at a first glance, yeah, that makes some kind of sense. I can see why that's an attractive proposition. I mean, I would love to be totally effective in my actions in the world. Come on, that'd be great. I do so many ineffective things all the time.
Oh my God, yes.
So now there is something that we wanted to touch on, and this is going to be a bit of a shift, so sorry for the whiplash, everybody. In History of Man, which for some reason I always think of it as what to audit, because one, it kind of is that, and two, it was the original title, but I know that most people probably know it by the History of Man. It's what it's published as. But anyway, Hubbard talks about Piltdown Man. Now, my audience is familiar with Piltdown, but we're going to go over the actual story of Piltdown Man, and then I want to talk about Hubbard's take on this.
Sure.
So Piltdown Man is a skull that was found in Piltdown, England, and it, for many years, was thought to be an authentic fossil. But as time went, it was more and more incongruous with like the rest of the story of human evolution that was being uncovered through the 20th century. So eventually it was re-examined and found to be a fairly old human skull, but not like, paleoanthropology. We're talking about archaeology old, as well as a baboon jaw that had been filed down to fit into the jaw joint of the human skull and then stained to make it also look very old. But it was actually a very modern orangutan jaw. Like the orangutan that had that jaw probably died in like, the mid-19th century, that kind of modern. And so, this is not a real organism that existed. Piltdown Man is just a hoax. We don't actually know who perpetrated the hoax. There are ideas about who did it, like the person who found it, which is an obvious one because you would know where to find the skull if you're the perpetrator. But there are also some other ideas, and that maybe that guy was just sort of, the actual hoaxer just knew he would be digging around there, so they placed the skull there. It doesn't super matter exactly who it is, but that's sort of the bird's eye view of what the Piltdown Man story is in terms of science. But Hubbard has a take on Piltdown Man that he wrote down shortly before the hoax was discovered. So what is the summary of his Piltdown Man idea?
Well, basically, he's labeling it as one of the second to last, if you will, stage of mankind's evolutionary process or progress, as remembered again in that genetic entity line. So here you have incidents he describes here, and I'll just quote from the book and the page on this. You have a creature not an ape, yet not entirely a man. And there are a number of issues that come from this stage of our evolution that still affect us and plague us now. Obsessions about biting, efforts to hide the mouth, early familial troubles, right? Relationship issues, stuff like that. You can imagine the kind of quality relationships that Piltdown Man had with Piltdown Wife, right? So, this kind of thing. And again, remember, these guys are coming at this from 1950s mentality, right? I mean, the sheer lack of imagination sometimes on the part of these guys, right? They would just go to Life magazine, read what's up, and then promptly remember it in their auditing sessions, especially when they're on handfuls of blues and grays, right? And stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because this is what Hubbard did. He took his kid, fresh out of high school, who came down to be with Hubbard, who was a deadbeat dad, who was an absent father. His son came to be with him, and this is what Hubbard did to him: is he gave him a bunch of drugs, laid him on a couch, put cans in his hands, and said, "Let's go. Let's remember our evolution." And this is the kind of crap they came up with, and that's why it's so low quality, even as a mythology.
Right. Well, like I described it at the beginning, it's literally the drug-addled ramblings of Hubbard's son. Like, that's literally what you're reading. It might not be word for word those ramblings, but that's where that's coming from. That's the ultimate source. Right. And so
the point of all of this, though, was always to develop content to audit.
Okay.
And Hubbard knew that the key to doing this, and I say this because it was his pattern for decades, was you give a little bit in a lecture. You hint at a little tiny bit of something: spaceships on Mars, on implant stations on Mars, trains on Venus, Arcabian confederacies that have 13 planets and spaceships and fire engines. And you just give that little bit. And then you let your people's imaginations run away with them.
Yeah.
And they even documented this in 1957 in a book called Have You Lived Before This Life, where they feature stories that people had come up with of their own past life stuff based on these little bits and pieces that Hubbard would dole out.
Okay, now I'm not super familiar with that book, but I do seem to remember something, which is that older editions had the names of the people who were associated with these stories, but then those names slowly started being taken out because it turns out most of them had left Scientology.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I find that a little interesting. It's like, oh, look at all these awesome stories from people's past lives. Like, oh, what do they think about that? Well, let's not talk about that part. Let's just talk about the story.
That's right. The end product of Scientology, as my friend Mark Headley likes to say, is you leave Scientology.
Yeah.
You get the fuck out of there.
Actually, this isn't really related to the basic topic, but like, it's shrinking. Like, they're not a growth organization.
No, they're shrinking like mad right now. We're talking about 30,000 people max.
Yeah.
And those are informed figures. They're not transparent. They're not open with their numbers. People like me who actually did see the numbers when I was in, and and others can have some educated guesses that are pretty accurate. And we all agree it's somewhere around 20, 25, max 30,000 people.
Now, sort of like the Catholic Church is like anyone who was ever baptized in a Catholic church, that's a member. Am I right in saying that or ever join the International Association of Scientologists, you're just now counted as a member as long as you haven't officially declared that I'm no longer a Scientology and I'm just, distancing myself from the organization. So if you went in and you were like, okay, I'm going to take this effective communication course, and then that's it. You never darken the doorway of another Scientology org.
Correct.
You're on the list. You're a Scientologist now.
Yep. Actually, worse than that, if you ever bought the Dianetics book.
Oh, wow. So if I just went online and bought Dianetics, I'm now a Scientologist, huh?
It's the only way that they were ever able to credibly in their own minds cross the 1 million mark.
Right.
Because there have never been 1 million active Scientologists on the planet.
So does my owning of 2 copies of the Quran make me a Muslim on its own?
According to their logic, it does.
Gee. I've been eating way too much bacon.
Scientologist, Dapper, they just don't know it yet.
Oh, right. Of course.
Right? That's a favorite saying in Scientology. Everybody's a Scientologist. They just
don't know it yet. Actually, interestingly, surprisingly enough, I use the Quran as an example. That actually ties into a bit of Islamic theology. There's an idea that you have actually a pre-birth memory. So before history really gets going, God creates the souls of every human who's ever going to exist. He gathers them all together. It must have been a very big meeting room. And he asks them, like, do you guys know who I am? And they're like, oh, yeah, you're our creator, you're God. Okay. And he's like, all right, well, now we're going to start having, like, a planet that you can, or world that you can go live on, and send down Adam and Eve as the first two, and all this stuff. And so there's this idea that in the back of everybody's mind, you kind of remember this event, and it leads you to have this inclination towards God, because you sort of vaguely have this unconscious memory of the time that God took your spirit and was like, hey, you know who I am? And obviously you said yes. Like, of course, you're God, you created, and you're the only God. This is an interesting sort of like connection, that there's that similar kind of idea that like you already know that this is true, but you might be denying it for some reason. Maybe a nefarious reason.
Absolutely. And for all the reasons we've already laid out, right? Because of all the spiral of downwards, you know, of stress and trauma and all of that. You're still in the Scientology dogma, right? You're still just as powerful as you've always been.
Right.
You're Gulliver, right? You're strapped down by paper and by thread, but you believe it is strong and holding you down. And so you are not able to exhibit your full spiritual potential and ability, which is on par with our understanding of what we call God.
Right.
How powerful you actually are. You know.
Also, there's sort of there's an idea in Scientology that it's sort of like a version of like multiple person solipsism. So solipsism is the idea that really you're the only thing that exists, right? Everything that in the world is just sort of like a game you play with yourself. But
yeah,
in Scientology, if I'm correctly informed on this, the idea is that all of the Thetans, of which there are who knows how many, are collectively creating the universe simply by agreeing that it exists. And
correct.
If they all just sincerely stopped doing that, it would simply blink out of existence, and then all the Thetans would just still be there, unembodied.
That's right.
Okay.
It would be like turning the simulation off.
Right.
You know, oh, hey, wow. Hey, everybody, take it. You know, everybody's taking their goggles off. Whoa, this is what's actually real. You know, it's like it would be that kind of a thing. Yeah.
And that's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how you would test that. So
you can't.
Yeah, I don't think I can call it pseudoscience. I think it's just non-science.
Yeah, nonsense.
Well,
it's another way of calling it, but yeah,
it's
definitely. It's not a scientific principle, but it's a philosophical construct, you could say.
Okay. I do want to let the audience know that we are going to be doing Q&A coming up relatively soon. So if you have questions, think about those. Super chatted questions do go to the front of the line, but I will absolutely be reading questions that are not super chatted just at me, so that way it is visually distinct from the rest of the chat feed. So at Dapper Dinosaur, ask your question, and like I said, if you want to jump to the front of the line, if you have a burning question, you just have to get out there. Can pay a little bit, and I'll read that before I continue on with any of the non-paid questions. So I also remember something from History of Man about barnacles and teeth. Is that a thing, or am I just making that up?
No, it sounds vaguely familiar. Hubbard definitely had a thing about teeth and about
probably because his teeth were terrible.
I know he talked about the rotten teeth or something. You could do this, that clam thing, and you can get somebody's jaw all screwed up. He tried to relate, these old style ideas to our modern body and how these are sources of trauma that would be unlooked for in psychology or psychiatry or even the church pastoral counseling. You would never go looking for stuff like this, and this was the spin that Scientology could offer, that was original at the time.
Right. Okay. Because I remember something about barnacles and having that cavities are actually something popping out of your tooth because of barnacles having a little cap at the top that they can let pressure in or out of, or something like that.
Yeah,
and then thinking
with that. That's right. I remember that. Something with that.
But cavities don't blow something out of your tooth. They're things that get dug into your tooth by bacteria. Like, we know this. This isn't a question that has to be like, oh, what's the cause of cavities? It's like, it's literally bacteria dissolving in the part of your tooth into a little hole because they have enough food to continue on with their production of all the various acids and whatnot that they produce as part of their metabolism.
Sure. Well, I guess if I was going to be forced to relate this to Hubbard and why he would talk about it that way, it's because Hubbard was deathly afraid of dentists. and his mouth was apparently a disaster zone. And this is shown in some later photographs of him as just incredibly bad teeth. And I'm pretty sure for him, he probably felt like his mouth was exploding in pain, from all of his dental issues. He had a nitrous, he claimed to have had a nitrous oxide dental surgery back in 1938 or sometime before there, where he died, and they had to resuscitate him. And during that surgery is when he had his first inkling of the spiritual realm and something, a reality that existed beyond this reality. And he claimed to have been shown the secrets of the universe in such a way that he didn't forget them like other people are forced to when they see such things.
That's convenient.
In other words, he claimed an out-of-body experience, and said it was legit. And he based an awful lot of his thinking from that point forward on the reality of that experience. And it was quite, what we look at as probably a nitrous-induced hallucination.
Right. Actually, that is something I do want to talk a bit about, because that is another pseudoscientific aspect, is this desirability of an out-of-body experience, which Scientology, they have the term, going exterior or exteriorization. And, I want to try and use a group's own terms for things when I can. So, but outside of Scientology, what a Scientologist would call exteriorization is what most people would call a psychotic episode.
Or an extreme dissociative episode. Yeah.
Which is not generally seen as desirable.
No. No, it's not something you want to experience.
And so what is it about this that is seen as such an important thing that I feel like I've heard people even brag that they claim they can go exterior at will?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the proof. It's the absolute subjective proof that you are not your body.
Has anyone...
That you exist outside of it, right?
Right. Now, I know that there have been experiments with out-of-body, experiences to see, is there anything to this? And, things are done put cards with numbers on them on a shelf above the person, and they can't see them, and the experimenter doesn't see them because a third party has put them. So it's double blind, right? Yep. And then you say, okay, we're going to do whatever it is that you are convinced is causing out-of-body experiences. And you're going to go float up and look at the cards, give the numbers, and basically, will always fail.
Yep.
Have you ever heard of anyone in Scientology? Because, like we said, many people in Scientology are just convinced that this is something they can do as a matter of course. You ever heard of anyone doing something like that? Like saying, hey, let's check this out. Let's test it. Let's see if it's true. No?
Absolutely not. Hubbard forbade it. He said it's a bad idea. Don't do that. He said you're barely on, you're standing on a cliff of uncertainty, and if you fall off of that cliff, you're lost forever. He didn't say those words. I'm putting a concept together here of where you go with Scientology, and what he did say was that you are not under any circumstances whatsoever to invalidate or test a person's recalls or perceptions from their auditing. It's not on you to do that.
Okay.
Right? That's their experience. And however tentative it might be. And at first, the sort of reasoning behind this was this uncertainty principle, this idea that you are you're just getting your little Thetan tendrils out there for the first time in millions of years. And here comes some asshat to slap you down again,
right,
and tell you that you're not actually aware and you don't actually remember. And none of that's real. That's the shit they've been feeding you for, millions of years. Now you're finally getting those little antenna out there. Well, the one thing we don't want to do is slap you down.
Right.
Right. You would never tell a baby in its first steps, how dare you not be able to walk with a book on your head, right? Like you wouldn't do that. Similar thinking here. But what it did, of course, was shut down any thinking or testing of anything he ever had to say. But this was the explanation that made a whole lot of sense to me and other Scientologists as to why we wouldn't want to go do that.
And of course, one big difference is that when I see a baby taking its first steps, I can pretty well verify that that's actually happening.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I the analogy stretches, but that's
it seems like
that's kind of
seems like that's an important distinction in the two different things.
The idea that you are an immortal spiritual being who has jailed yourself, through your crimes and inaction and difficulties and trauma over the millennia you've existed. Once you accept that, anything's possible. So,
Okay. Well, so we're almost at the point where I'm gonna we're gonna start Q&A. So, is there anything that you feel is another pseudoscientific idea floating around Scientology that we haven't really touched on that you want to touch on in the next few minutes, and then we'll head off to Q&A? Or anything like that?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's a lot of pseudoscientific nonsense in Scientology. The auditing process itself. One thing I'll just throw out here, I've done a lot of work to try to explain this on my channel. Hours of explanations on this.
Which go watch. It's linked, guys.
Cool. I hope you do, because this is really fascinating stuff, at least from a psychological point of view, and also, I suppose, from a religious studies point of view too. But one of the things I like to or want to stress is the auditing therapy counseling process in Scientology. They call it auditing. Is damaging to people in or out of the church. It's bad for you. It induces trance states. It involves post and pre hypnotic suggestion. It involves doing things that are how do I put this? Narcissistifying.
Okay, sure.
Right? I mean, it's got false memory implantation going on. Hypnosis, one definition I've heard or description I've heard of hypnosis that fits here is guided imagination. Right? You guide a person, through a process of imagination, and that is what auditing is. It sets you up, it primes you with this knowledge, with these lectures, with this information. And then it lets you loose for your imagination to run wild. And then after it's all over, it takes a big rubber stamp and says, all of that's real.
Yeah.
All of it happened. That's why you feel better right now, is because that was real.
Right.
That's not why you feel better. And it doesn't make it real just because you remembered it. And that's the lie at the bottom of Scientology's auditing process. And that's any auditing session, not just the Xenu stuff.
Right.
It's the lower level stuff. It's the higher level stuff. And I only throw this out there because it's not obvious. And people fall for this and think that it's useful or helpful to their lives, even outside of the church. And it's not. The entire structure of auditing was created with malice aforethought to imprison people's minds, not free them. And that's something I really want to stress about Scientology.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's an important thing to stress, because I've also gotten the impression that it doesn't seem to be like a good way to go about this whole thing.
No, it's not.
So we have first a couple super chats that came in earlier. I want to read those, and then we're going to start getting into the questions. So first, Valkyrie Vision says, 2 of my favorite rabbit hole communicators together. Yes. Both of us can go down some pretty deep rabbit holes at various times. And now we're going down the same one, which is, look, I'm having a great time with this conversation. This is awesome.
Cool.
And then Vandalia1998 for $5 says, the funniest thing about the Piltdown thing is that it might have been started by the Sherlock Holmes author whose main character was about logic. And that actually is, it is true that he is one of the suspects. Arthur Conan Doyle is one of the suspects to have created the Piltdown hoax.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Apparently, I don't know the whole story, so guys, if you're interested in this, actually go check it out. Don't trust me on this, because this is just my vague memories. There was something like he had a dispute with what today we would call a paleoanthropologist or something. It was like, I'm going to get one over on him, and that was the idea behind this. That apparently he did have a public dispute with one of these guys. Like I said, don't take my word for that. Go check it out if you care. Let's see. FSM the dog says, what is it about the U.S. that leads to these new religions appearing there. Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology. We could also add Mormonism. So I don't know if you have any ideas as to, does it seem to you like the U.S. creates that more new religious movements come out of the U.S. than other places?
No, not at all. We are simply aware of them more here and they are publicized and put in the media more than they are maybe in other countries or other areas of the world. But the idea that Southeast Asia, doesn't have more cultic activity going on than the US is ridiculous. I mean, there's tons of cults all over the place. Anywhere you have a group of people aligned around a central leadership that's telling them what to do and creating any kind of us versus them attitude, you have the potential for a cultic situation. As soon as you enter codependency and abuse into that relationship, you got yourself a proto-cult. And if it has a centralized, that us versus them starts developing into a belief set of some kind. And this can center around an acting class, around a martial arts dojo. Nexium was not religious.
Right.
Enron was not religious, and yet they were extremely cult-like as a business. So any kind of relationship situation or group situation could potentially turn into a cult situation.
Yeah.
And we need to stress that very, very clearly, because there is no nationality, culture, belief set, or race, creed, color. None of it matters to whether a cult's going to form up in that group or not. If you're a human being, it can happen.
And I want to touch a little bit on the aspect of new religions per se, because not every new religion is going to be a cult automatically. There have been new religions that started that did not turn into cults. And those are not exclusive to the United States, so in terms of like fairly recent new religions that have been created, the Baha'i faith is not particularly old. There are certain sects of Islam that have only recently come about in the last few hundred years. Those didn't happen in the United States. Like the Ahmadiyyas is the first one that comes to mind for Islam. The prophet of Ahmadiyya Islam is after Muhammad was not, like 500-600 years ago. I mean, this is a fairly recent thing. There are new religious movements popping up in places like Japan and India. It's, the Moonies popped up in South Korea. So right. I think part of the impression that new religions are prominent in the United States is sort of a result of the fact that the media in the United States likes to report about the United States.
Exactly. It's a U.S. centric view, and it makes sense. I get it. I understand why people think that way, but it's only because the most of the media they're exposed to is U.S. centric.
Yeah. Now we have a membership milestone, 3 months at the Soropsa level for Chris McDaniel. Thank you very much for your contributions to the channel. And Chris asks, does David Miscavige really believe this, or is he faking it? Have they found his wife, Shelley? And for those who don't know, David Miscavige is basically the cult leader of the Church of Scientology.
Right. The question of David Miscavige's belief of this has gone back and forth in my mind over the years, because it's hard to tell from the way that he acts, right? We do know for an absolute fact that he did believe it all at one point. He joined the Sea Org when he was 16 years old. He's a second-generation Scientologist raised in it. He is definitely a very intense person. But the way that he leads Scientology and the way that he acts and the things that he does leads me to believe that he doesn't really believe it the same way I believed it. He does not, for example, treat or care for the staff in any way or anything like that. Yet there's policies Hubbard wrote that, you could utilize to be constructive, not just destructive. And Miscavige tends to emphasize the destructive aspects of Scientology much more than he does any of the positives of it. And there are some positives in it, but they are so far outweighed by the negatives that it is not worth going and trying to polish those little diamonds, because they're not little diamonds. They're just little tiny pieces of common sense that everybody knows. But the negatives are so negative, you want to stay the hell away from it. So Miscavige tends to exaggerate those things, and that means he's just like Hubbard is all about control and dictatorship and feeding and creating the authoritarian control system that Scientology is. He has choices. He could take it, and that tells me that he doesn't really understand, you know, any of the positives of Scientology that all of these followers, you know, like me, like other people who were in it for so long, dedicated our lives to it.
Right.
That's not the same page that he's on. And that's what lends me to believe that he's not really a believer, that he really does see that it's just a scam now and he's just running with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is actually related, even though it is just the next question up. This is from Dr. Tapioca Weasel. What happens when David Miscavige dies?
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
It all depends on the context in which he goes, right? Does he die in prison? Does he die on a perp walk? Or does he die comfortably ensconced in his Scientology hideaway, right? Somebody's going to step up and take over is probably what's going to happen. You have a multi-million, billion-dollar organization here with real estate all over the planet. It's not just going to fold and dissolve itself. Somebody or some group of people probably step up in the same way I think what this guy Rutherford stepped up in the JWs. Other people stepped up in other groups, right? You had, you know, after Smith died off in the right? You had these other guys step up. It's pretty organically set up for us to do that. So I'm predicting that sort of thing. However, the membership has been dying off so quickly, and it's becoming such a tiny group so fast under Miscavige's nonsensical leadership, quote unquote. I use that term very loosely with that guy. That, you know, it's kind of dissolving itself from inside. And, you know, I'm not saying it's got a couple years left. There's a lot of inertia there, but it's not a growing concern right now. And yet we know from history that it can take generations for groups to die off, even tiny ones like Scientology.
In fact, I believe that at least up until a few years ago, there were still some living Shakers out there, which is a tiny little Christian sect that at one point was quite popular.
That's right. Look up the Muggletonians.
Okay.
Check them out sometime, right? I believe that's the term. They took a couple hundred years for them to die off, and they were like a few tens of people. It wasn't even like huge.
Yeah. And the Shakers didn't have the advantage of family tradition because they forbade all sects of any kind.
That's right. That's right. I remember that. Those two old people, who were the last ones.
It turns out that a religion is going to last a whole lot longer if you allow reproduction, even if you don't allow conversion. There are plenty of religions that still exist and have existed for hundreds or thousands of years that don't allow people to convert. But they do let people have kids. So
yeah, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
So this is actually a question that is for me. It says, as a former United States Navy dinosaur, what do you think of Lieutenant Hubbard's Navy record? Yeah, it's not great. So basically, Hubbard joined during World War II. He did not do almost anything at all. He was given command of a small boat that had some depth charges and a few guns. And he basically did... First, he just dropped all of his depth charges on literally nothing, thinking it was a Japanese submarine. It was literally nothing. So then he was ordered back to shore because, you know, what's the point of having a boat with no ammo out there in the Navy? There isn't one, so go back to shore. Okay. And then his next act was to shell some Mexican islands because he didn't know where he was. And at that point, he was relieved of command. Then he had some medical complaints. And that's how his Navy career ended. It was basically...
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Now, he would like to claim that he went into naval intelligence to infiltrate a satanic sex cult, when actually, no, he was just not kicked out, but, you know, his military career was done. Then he voluntarily joined a satanic sex cult.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is, that's my opinion of his naval career.
And it needs to be commented on. I don't do it often enough. The stolen valor.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of that.
Yeah. The Church of Scientology has claimed Hubbard has Purple Hearts. He doesn't. The Church of Scientology has claimed many awards for Hubbard that he never received or earned. And that all follows off of Hubbard's tall tales about his war exploits, which are so far off the beam of what actually happened that it's almost it's disgustingly laughable, if you know what I mean. It's like grossly funny, but also gross.
But no, see, Chris, that's all just been covered up because of his career in naval intelligence.
Yeah. I know, there's sheep-dipped files. I know. I'm sorry. I should give more credence to the fact that his files have been sheep-dipped. I understand.
Of course. Yeah, we can't just trust his military records. What?
No,
are you crazy?
No. The famous conspiracy theorist Colonel Prouty should have set me straight on that. I'm sorry that I strayed from the party line there.
Yeah. Hey, pro tip for conspiracy theorists. When you try to explain your lack of evidence with a conspiracy, all you now have to do is both provide evidence that the conspiracy exists and also provide the evidence of the thing that you haven't provided evidence for. It doesn't actually help you to say that there's a conspiracy. It just now means you have an even bigger evidential burden to meet. So maybe don't blame things on a conspiracy unless you can actually demonstrate the conspiracy. Which, to be fair, there have been conspiracies that were demonstrated, right? Like the whole Bay of Pigs debacle wasn't just a made-up thing. That actually happened.
That's right.
So it does happen.
If you want to go to disturbing places with conspiracy theories, go read about Operation Paperclip.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, look, there have been plenty of nefarious things done by, collusion by government agents. It's just that you can't just use that as a blanket excuse for why you have no evidence for your crazy idea.
No, you cannot.
So Vandalia 1998 asks, how do you know the difference between a cult and just another branch division of a religion that has split?
A few things. First thing is, what happens when you try to leave? Right? Do they follow you, stalk you, harass you, won't let you go, keep coming after you, come knocking on your door? Right? Is your membership so vital that they can't let you go, and it becomes uncomfortable, right? Even abusive. That's one of the best markers that you've been involved in something that was really not good for you. But there are red flags you can use before that. Extreme belief. We have the truth with a capital T. Nobody else does. Big claims, over-promising, under-delivering. Us versus them mentality, right? We're the good guys. Everybody else kind of doesn't really know what they're doing or saying or thinking. We're the only ones who really do. That's the kind of thing that's a necessity to develop in groups like this, because it's what justifies all the abuse and nonsense. Those are a few things you could look for right off.
Yeah.
A centralized leader, an obsession with money or sex or influence or power, those kind of things. An undue level of influence. If you find yourself getting involved in a group, let's say an acting class, and you find that the people in the acting class are not just respectful of the teacher, but seem to worship him, can never find fault with him, can never criticize him. He's always right on. And if you don't see it, there's something wrong with you. If that's a consistent and repeated attitude, you 3-4 instances of that, you should start looking for the door.
Yeah,
because those are red flags.
And connected with that, it's not really true that the cliche that you hear sometimes that a new religion first becomes a cult, and then eventually, after a few decades or centuries or whatever, it calms down and becomes not a cult. Like I said earlier.
It's a theory that has some legs. I've certainly pondered it.
Plenty of religions do start out cult-like, but also we can watch instances where there doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. Like one is there's no particular evidence of cult-like behavior that I'm aware of with, say, the Baha'i, which is a fairly new religion. There's a guy
I've not had them come across my plate particularly in terms of cultic stuff.
Yeah.
It's true. And the reasons are easy enough to understand, right? You have a small group of people who are, intensely believe in this new idea that nobody else really believes in. And they are the subject of ridicule from the outside. They are the subject of jokes, or they become a problem for people who don't believe what they do.
Or sometimes they're legitimately actually oppressed. That also does happen.
No, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. To one degree or another, there is a perception or a reality of oppression. And the response to oppression is to double down, triple down, get stronger and harder on the belief set or around the leader or figure who represents the authority, and really pile in on this and then try to bring other people into your circle and convince them of the truth of this because it's so damn important.
Yeah.
Right. And elevating the importance of these things is also another red flag you can watch for. Are we saving the world here, or are we just learning how to act? You know, and it's quite interesting what you can find, you know, when you're finding the same kind of promises Scientology's making of spiritual enlightenment and godhood or something out of your local martial arts dojo. You know, you might want to start asking some questions, right?
Which, by the way, speaking of saving the world, do we have like an ETA on clearing the planet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's right around the corner. Just go ask the Scientologists. Oh, yeah, they're right on the precipice, man.
Oh, man. Yeah, we're all going to be clear just a few more years here. Don't worry.
That's right. Just a few more years.
Smitty asks, could Scientology morph into a more moderate religion?
Yeah, this gets asked to me sometimes, and it could, but it would have to literally shed parts of itself in order for it to stop being a destructive cult. And I mean a good chunk of stuff. All the Xenu stuff would have to go away. All of the confidential stuff would have to go away. The Office of Special Affairs, which is its dirty tricks bureau, that would have to go away. All of the enforced shunning and disconnection, and I'm going to label you a suppressive person because you dare to say something in disagreement with Hubbard. You know, all of that's got to go away. And what you're left with is a small collection of self-help or personal empowerment courses that are based around common sense principles.
Yeah.
And
is that even a religion at that point, or is that just a
hardly?
Yeah.
You know, because the spiritual aspects of it are tied in hand with this abusive control framework called auditing, and it really can't be ignored. It's designed to control, and so if you're going to strip all of that nonsense out of Scientology, you're really going to gut it. You know,
Savage Cobra says that's actually the second occasion he got relieved with cause from his command of a small warship. I wasn't aware of a time other than the two incidences that I pointed out, but I mean, I don't know. I don't have his whole everything memorized. Maybe
there might have been there was a ship he was going to. There's something over on the East Coast that he was involved in, and then I think he got transferred to the West. I don't remember. I don't think that was removing him from command, though. I think it was the shelling incident off of Oregon's coast, and then the Mexico thing that really did it. That was his sort of graveyard ticket.
Yeah, don't shell the sovereign territory of an allied state in the middle of a war. It's a really bad idea, guys.
Really, really bad.
Just in case you ever find yourself in command of a naval vessel. Yeah. Don't do it.
Maybe not do that.
Vadim Slomovsky-Radchenko says, maybe Hubbard was just reenacting the Dogger Bank incident, of infamous Russian fleet that got sunk at Tsushima. I'm not familiar with it because I'm buff, but I mean, if it's a similar incident, then maybe. Let's see.
If you gave me a globe and told me to find Tsushima on that map and pointed a gun at my head, I don't think I could do that. Don't know anything about that.
Elephantint, I believe is how I'm going to pronounce that right now. Guys, if I ever mispronounce your name, let me know. And ideally use the International Phonetic Alphabet to correct me. But if you can't, then you can just try to do a phonetic spelling with English spelling rules. Because technically those do exist. Says, as I heard, Scientology is notorious for not letting people leave and persecuting them. Chris, how did you deal with leaving? That's not us. We can get through that in 2 or 3 minutes, right? That's not going to be.
Oh yeah, easy peasy. Yeah, it's only been 10 years of my life. Bottom line is, I prepared my life when I started. When I got out of Scientology in 2013, mentally out. When I went down the internet rabbit hole, I realized that I had been involved in something that was vastly different than what I thought I had been involved in for all those years, and I was pretty pissed. I was pretty upset. And I decided to start speaking out publicly, but I did it anonymously at first. And it was not until 2014, after I was found out by the church and declared a suppressive person by them and lost everything. I lost all my connections, all of it, that I then started speaking out under my own name and started doing videos. And that's when I started my YouTube channel. Before I did any of that, I contacted my employers, my family, the new friends that I had developed outside of Scientology's, world. And I let them know that it's very possible that at any time you could start hearing or seeing some really weird stuff about me.
Yeah.
And if you do, I'm giving you the heads up now that that's from Scientology because of what I'm doing here. This is what they do. This is their history.
Mm-hmm.
And not one person had a problem. They were all like, not a problem. I told my boss, I was like, they could pick it. And he was like, bring it. I can't wait to see
nice.
it. So I had a lot of support in that. And that really enabled me to then start doing my work. And then, surprise, they never really came around. It wasn't until I got on Leah and Mike's show that I got a hate website on me. It's up right now. You can go look it up. And there's a video of my ex-wife trashing me and all of that.
Is it Who Is Chris Shelton? Is that the name of it? Yeah. Because it's always that. It's always who is name.
No.
Come on.
It's actually not that. What I am is I'm featured on the Leah.
Oh.
What is Scientology Aftermath site. And every single person who was on that show got a page.
Of course.
And I was one of them, right? So I have that there with the church trashing me. And that was not fun to experience, but it has not been to my detriment either. It's only really been a badge of honor for me. And I'm okay. I'm not in this to get Scientology to attack me.
Right.
I don't need that status. I am doing what I'm doing because it's the right thing to do, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Now, I think it's to some degree, like this tactic of just smear campaigns, like it's just got to be so ineffective at this point, because the thing is, almost everyone has this idea about the reputation of the Church of Scientology, and it's not good.
Yeah. No.
Like when you mention it, and everyone's like, "Oh, that, no, don't want anything to do with that." And if you're like, "Oh yeah, but all these Scientology critics have all these websites," like, yeah, from the Church of Scientology, who cares? They have no credibility left at this point.
Correct.
So yeah, do you think that's going to make a shift in tactic? Because clearly not working. To just
Oh God, no. See, that's the thing about cults is they can't change.
Yeah.
that's part of the problem with them is they have a very hard time evolving. They change their public imaging and their branding, but they don't change how they actually are.
Yeah.
And the number of direct orders and policies and the culture of Scientology that develops around those policies is what you see. It can't be avoided unless you gut Scientology and remove all that stuff. And it's been very clear that David Miscavige is not at all interested in changing any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a question that I didn't get tagged in, but I did notice. So, hey, Chesh, get to tag me if you want to have a question reliably answered.
Chesh.
But yeah, Chesh is here. And she asks, what's the difference between cult and occult?
Oh, okay. Well, the way I use it or describe it or talk about it, a cult is really simply just a group with some intense ideas or founded around an idea of central focus that everybody's kind of on the same page on. And we use this term, in destructive or constructive ways. It's got dictionary definitions that everybody's kind of on board with. I talk about destructive cults because I focus on groups that are very, very problematic, that have abuse as part of their dogma and setup. That's a cult, right? That's a cult,
right?
As I use the term, and I understand that this is a broad language and all of that, and it would be more accurate for me to say authoritarian, high control group that that is with a totalist belief set that enforces us versus them and all that. I could give this long phraseology, but we just go cult, and it's short for culture, by the way. That's where it comes from. It comes from the idea of culture, of a group and the mores and the ideas and rules and guidelines that a group sets up around itself that makes it a distinct group. So every group has culture, a culture that it develops, and that's where this kind of idea of calling it a cult comes from. thing. That has to do with supernatural belief and understanding the world, and it's sort of pseudo-philosophical in a lot of ways. And it has to do with mystery schools and trying to explain and understand ourselves and power and our relationship with the universe and that kind of thing. And it's sort of a semi-religious, semi-philosophical pursuit. And you've got so many different strains of the occult and so many different schools of belief that it's really only a broad umbrella term for, you know, man's pursuit of knowledge and empowerment outside of religion, you could even say. I mean, that's probably too broad a brush, but you know, that's kind of more the direction of the occult.
All right. Now, this is not technically a question, it's a request, and it's fairly quick, so I'm going to read it a little bit out of order. RNGD Gaming says, can you ask Chris to give Mike Rinder a big hug from me?
Sure. Next time I see him.
All right. So next time you see him, got to give him a big hug and say, this is from RNGD Gaming.
Okay, I'll make sure to get that across to him.
TC the Unbeliever asks, any thoughts on Shen Yun or Falun Gong? Sorry, vague question.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, this comes up from time to time. I have a limited knowledge set on this one, okay? I haven't gone deep on Falun Gong, but I understand it to be a cultic response, a group that operates on cultic principles as a response to the cultic nonsense that the CCP gets up to, the Chinese Communist Party, which is the ruling force in the country of China. And they are very cult-like. They have all kinds of 1984-like, you know, things going on over there. That we can point to and go, yeah, that's pretty nonsensical and abusive stuff. So you have a group of people there who have formed up this, you know, semi-religious, as I understand it. Again, I've not done a deep dive here, so I'm only giving you a flyby here.
Right.
But it's a group that is revolutionary or resistive to the CCP and its efforts, and yet it itself acts an awful lot like a cult, right? It's very demanding on its members. It can be even abusive to its membership. It's all or nothing. We're all in this, you know, sort of thing, and you have to give of everything you have, and maybe marriages are regulated and stuff like that. You know, a lot of control being placed on the people. There's a group in Iran that is an Iranian revolutionary group. Their name is escaping me right now, who's very similar. You know, when you join up, it's all or nothing. You have to divorce your wife. You can't have kids. You have to give all. You have to wear this uniform 24/7. You know, this kind of uniformity and compliance that's demanded out of the group is taken to an extreme level, and that's where we get cults.
Okay. Now, I think this is going to end up being our last question, because then we're going to do some wrap-up stuff, and then we're going to get out of here, because I did promise Chris that this would go at most 2 hours. So, you know. This is from Valdalia 1998, who says, are all these cults new things, or how long has the longest cult been around?
Oh, geez, the longest one? That's a tough one, because, you know, I mean, I guess there's still some extreme Zoroastrianisms around or something, right?
I mean, yeah, there are Zoroastrians. There's there's still some in Iran, very few in Iran, but there's the Parsi in India who are, although it's an ethno-religion without a central authority, so I'm not sure if it's technically a cult. Yeah, I mean, there's probably some more extreme, harsh, inappropriate versions, but my understanding is that overall it probably doesn't meet the definition of a cult, Zoroastrianism.
No, probably not. Probably not. You have different strains of this stuff. As far as mainstream or things, you know, words people will recognize, I mean, I don't know, the Mormons have been around for a while. Christianity is not in and of itself a cult. It's too big. It's way too much variety.
There are individual Christian cults that exist.
Correct. You know, Westboro Baptist is a great example of literally a little cult,
right,
that uses Christian principles, but really is just an abusive group. So longest, you know, a little hard for me to say, actually.
Yeah, that is a hard, like, if you go with just like the definition that historians tend to use, which is basically any group of people with a particular religious practice that is easily identifiable, well then, I mean, you could probably just pick something like, you know, Hinduism or something. But if you're going with the destructive cult idea, which is I think what really is being asked, then I don't know if I could think of one. But you are right. I mean, Mormonism is fairly old, and it's definitely less cultish than it was when it first started, where it was run by this one guy who was a bit of a sex pest. but
Yep.
it still has a whole lot of the high behavior or high control aspects to it. You know, there's a lot of thought stopping behavior. Um, there's a lot of pressure to not leave the religion. There's even some control over things like who you should and shouldn't marry and things like that.
Oh yeah, the degree of sexual control in the Mormon Church is actually really underappreciated by the public at large. It's really quite something. They interview kids, 10, 11 years old about their masturbatory practices and stuff. And this is unlicensed people.
Yeah, don't do that.
Local bishops.
That's inappropriate.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's horribly inappropriate. But the Mormons still do this to this day, and they justify it and rationalize it, and it's not okay. And that kind of controlling stuff is still going on there, and it's just a little too icky to just go, oh no, they're all a good group of people. There's icky stuff going on there, and there's also some pretty deeply buried misogyny kind of deep into the belief set that is incredibly hard to extricate from.
Mm-hmm. Elephant TNT says real quick, and I'll just answer this real quick. Says probably there are some Judaism sects that are culty. There absolutely are. There are actually some that are fairly well known. Overall, as a percentage of the population of humans, Judaism is a fairly small group. So within it, you're probably not going to hear about all of the cults, but there definitely are some Jewish cults, and also not strictly necessarily about cults, but I do actually have a video series about a guy who basically went into a whole bunch of young earth creationism stuff, but he's Jewish and he pretends to be a rabbi. He's actually not. And he has a following that has some cultish tendencies, and also controversially engaged in some Holocaust revisionism, which is unusual for a Jewish man to do. But yeah, he was one of those, like, wasn't really 6 million Jews, and his reasoning is, well, because not all of them were super observant, so not all of them count. Like, oh, thanks, buddy. That's
wow.
Yeah.
So he's literally running no true Scotsman fallacy on the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. Of course he is.
Man, come on, dude.
Terrible person. But yeah, so if that's Yosef Mizrahi, I have it under the title "The Jewish Matt Powell," because if you know who Matt Powell is, you'll understand who Yosef Mizrahi is. He's just Matt Powell, but you swap out Christianity for Judaism, and there you go. You got the same guy. But with that, Chris, do you have anything coming up on your channel that you want to tell people about?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We've been covering the Danny Masterson trial quite closely, and I've had a few things to say about that lately, because it resulted in a mistrial, and this is a rape trial, right? We're hoping that he will be taken to justice and that they'll have a redo. Otherwise, there's a civil case that we're sort of following. And otherwise, what's on my channel is not, the hot topic stuff. What's on my channel is content that's going to still be good a year, 2, 3, 4 from now, right? It's stuff you can go to educate yourself on cults, on destructive behavior, on coercive control, what it's all about, this kind of stuff. This is how I approach these things, a very psych-oriented, soc-oriented kind of channel. I've interviewed psychologists, sociologists, cult exit counselors, former members of lots of different groups, not just Scientology. I harp on Scientology a lot as a case study, but the fact is it really is just for me now a thing to demonstrate the principles that apply to, help people out with that. So that's what I put out there. And then I'll say I also do personal consultation for people who could use that. I'm available for that. I don't do therapy. It's not the same thing. And I'm not a life coach. I'm a consultant. Okay. So it's kind of its own thing, but if somebody's come out of a cult, doesn't really know where to, where they should plant their feet, the reacclimation process or recovery process is often difficult for people coming out of a cult headspace, and they could use some help. I provide that.
Right.
Or advice for family and friends of people who have family or friends who are in a cult. How do you talk to them? What do you do? Most people blow it, and they end up blowing the relationship.
That's important.
Yeah. So I can advise people on how to not blow it, So that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, like I said, guys, the first thing in the description is a tag that if you click it will lead you to Chris's YouTube channel. So if you have not done that, I highly encourage you to go do that, because Chris, you probably don't know this, but I started watching you years ago. So.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, in fact, when you were on Leah Remini's show, I was like, oh, hey, I know Chris Shelton.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you have been following me for a while. No wonder you're so literate on all this stuff.
Yep. Well, that connects into the whole, like, I had that friend that I talked about, and so that like background interest never really went away, I mean.
Awesome.
So we'll take a look at what's coming up on my calendar. So first I want to say to all my members, you probably didn't see it because I screwed up the early access for a video. So I accidentally set a link to this video to just be public, which does two things. One, it lets anyone watch it, which is not supposed to be what was happening because it was supposed to be only for my supporters as early access. Because when you put out something for members only, YouTube makes a big deal out of getting it to your members. So later on today, do expect if you're a supporter, either on Patreon or on the channel, a link to my part 2 of my series about the Institute for Creation Research lying about dinosaurs, because it's very blatant lies. I mean, and then also later on today, after that, part 3 should be up for early access because it just finished rendering before this show. And so I'm going to be uploading it after the show because I don't want to take up the bandwidth while I'm on the show with, that. So, yeah, if you're a channel member, I mean, buckle in for an hour and 20 minutes or so of new content today from me. So, and if you're not, of course, it'll be coming out sometime in, I don't know, like March. I'm like 4 months ahead on my scripted videos. So,
wow.
But on Tuesday, it's probably actually going to be Jackson with Jackson, my show with Jackson Wheat, where we talk about Dr. Charles Jackson, who is a mendacious idiot. I'll say that. So look forward to that. And then on Thursday will be the final episode of my 4-part series on Robert Carter and the ways in which he gets evolutionary biology badly wrong while pretending to be a biologist generally, even though he's actually a plant genetic engineer, which is not just an evolutionary biologist. Surprise, surprise. Although, to be fair, he's done some cool stuff. So he's patented some techniques to get various kinds of bioluminescent proteins into various organisms for testing purposes, and even in some cases for commercial purposes. So he has done some really cool stuff. It's just that when he goes outside of that, it all just kind of falls apart. And then I have no idea what's happening a week from today. So something will be happening, but I have no idea what it's going to be. Go check out Chris's channel, and we will see all of you guys. Well, I'll see you at least on Tuesday, and I hope that Chris sees you next time he has a video up. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Venthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Denny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, McSpooks, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Atheist Animal. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if an annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.